All right, welcome to week 15. This week we're dealing with chapter 13 on domestic policy, which includes two broad issue areas, economic policy and social welfare policy. Economic policy has a couple of important dimensions. The most obvious issues are related to taxing and spending. What choices does the federal government make in terms of investing in what we call the general welfare? And how should the government go about raising the money? In short, how should we pay for the investments that the government chooses to make? We shouldn't be under any illusions. Whomever is elected to fill positions of power within the federal government is going to tax. The federal government will tax and they will spend money. That is what governments do. Anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. Um, there is also the broad realm of what we call regulatory policy. That's the sort of thing that independent regulatory commissions do to illustrate. Because of massive amounts of stock manipulation in the early part of the 20th century, in the 1930s, Congress created the Securities and Exchange Commission. And their job is basically to monitor stock trades, analyze patterns of trading, and identify instances where people are engaging in stock manipulation, trying to manipulate the market just to get the price of a commodity to rise and then sell out of it and make money. In other words, the job of the regulators and the SEC is to find out when people are cheating the market and prosecute them, right? So why does the federal government need to engage in that kind of regulation? Because people are unscrupulous when it comes to money, all right? When people can get away with cheating, they're going to cheat. And middle class people are the ones that are getting the money taken away from them. So, if you're a middle class investor, why would you invest money in the market if wealthy people are just going to steal it, consistently from you? When markets are rigged, even sound investment strategies are vulnerable to being lost. And entering the market is kind of like playing the lottery, which is another way of saying that it's a waste of money for all but the lucky few. So, could the stock market regulate itself? In theory, it could, but in reality, it never has. Okay, so you know that's the reason why we have regulatory policy. I'll give you another example of why regulatory policy exists. Think about the crashes of the two Boeing 737 Maxes. The first one in Indonesia in October of 2018, and the second one in Ethiopia in March of 2019. Boeing is in the business of manufacturing and selling passenger airplanes, and they have competition. They needed to get a new plane on the market quickly that would be more fuel efficient, so they confronted a choice. Take the time to redesign a plane from scratch that would be aerodynamically sound and conform to the newer, more efficient, and more powerful jet engines they were putting on planes, or keep their existing airframe, replace the old engines with the new ones, and rely on autopiloting computer patches to resolve any aerodynamic issues that might come up. Boeing went with the latter option because they were afraid they would lose contracts to their European competitors. The problem here was that the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, didn't have sufficient aircraft engineering expertise to adequately oversee Boeing. Because of budget cuts, they relied on Boeing to regulate themselves. How did that work out for the 346 passengers on those two planes? Does that help you understand why we need regulatory agencies to actually regulate? Chapter 13 also deals with the issue of social welfare policy. Why should the government be involved with welfare? Welfare is associated with the idea of a social safety net, which is designed to prevent people from the worst implications of economic failure. Welfare is designed to ensure that the poor have opportunities, and it's also designed in the United States to try and mitigate the worst costs associated with taking risks in engaging in entrepreneurship. Okay, so it's a hand up rather than a hand out. How big is America's welfare system? Well, in brute terms, it's huge because you're dealing with the needy in a continent-sized nation that tolerates much greater levels of income inequality than other affluent industrialized nations. However, when compared to other industrialized democratic societies, America's welfare system is actually pretty small and takes up a relatively small proportion of the public sector, right? So when you look at all the the different kind of programs that we would describe as as welfare. Yes, they're big programs, Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare. These are very large, significant programs. But in practical terms, they represent a relatively modest part of GDP, and they're really not that, they're really not that big in practical terms. So this is what we're dealing with this week. We have, as always, the quiz in the forum, and then we also have our second writing assignment, which is basically on bureaucracy, right? I wanted you to read this article by Michael Lewis and give me some critical reaction to it. That's your last writing assignment. Next week we have our final. That's the final week of the semester. So let's have a great week.